What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr., John Morantz, Joe Johnson's, Ja Rafts. Of course, we've got Jays we got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
I am happy to be actually talking about the forthcoming college basketball season. I think this is the first time, right?
Contemplating. I believe so.
We did a little bit of looking ahead at the end of the national championship, but we now get to talk about teams.
Hey, we do so many podcasts not talking about teams. We do that. We do that for like 6 months. We'll talk about games for 6 months, but then we gotta come up with content for 6 months, right?
Well, a lot of that we get to spend talking about teams eventually.
Yeah, but
there is the dark time though.
But there's also like a subcategory of but then it's still 3 months of predictive conversation.
Sure.
Right.
Not actually talking about things that have happened on the court.
Right.
Yeah.
So these are the dark times.
And see, I love talking about this kind of hypothetical stuff. So.
And now we're into we're close, very close. And in many cases, where we're going to be when it comes to rosters in the 2022-2023 season. The transfer portal is relatively quiet, and at least the biggest of names are back. The biggest of names have made their. Some of them are back. Okay, some of them are back. Okay,
or have a new home.
Don't look at me like that. Some of them are back. Some of them are back are headed somewhere else. Some of them have left the sport completely. But all of them have made decisions. That's where I'm trying to get to, Josh. All of them have made decisions.
We got there.
And therefore, it's time to do a Winners and Losers Transfer Portal podcast. Mr. Doring, let's start with winners.
Okay.
And you have to start in one place or we're turning off the podcast. Oh, do you know which one I'm talking about?
Well, see, one of mine is a little bit of a shortcut.
A shortcut?
That's the place I want to start.
Okay, start there.
The Big East Conference.
Okay, go on.
I just want to go down this because I started looking and I thought, okay, I like this Big East team and this Big East team, but wait a second. I can't make this entire list a bunch of Big East winners, but to me, they are some of the biggest winners. And collectively as a conference, nobody did better. So here we go. I just want to run down some of them, and if you've got a team or two that you want to focus on. The first team that jumped out at me was St. John's.
Okay.
I know you're not particularly thrilled about Andre Curbelo. I have questions too. But Andre Curbelo, Posh Alexander in the backcourt. Fascinating if nothing else. Exceptionally talented if nothing else.
Are we sure Andre Curbelo is exceptionally talented?
Yes.
Are we sure?
My questions have nothing to do with that.
Is Posh Alexander exceptionally talented?
Go look at his numbers from last year. That is an awfully good.
That's either an awfully good backcourt or a backcourt that is such a train wreck. You can't take your eyes off.
Yes, it is a high potential, captivating backcourt if nothing else. And you add David Jones from DePaul inside the conference, who averaged 14.5 points and 7.4 rebounds. Phenomenal. And you're adding it basically to the core you already have. Okay. Because a lot of this for me is sort of the net gain you have, as opposed to just getting the big names. Butler. You don't have a coach. Your team enters the transfer portal. You don't lose anybody after you hire Thad Matta, and you bring in Manny Bates and Eric Hunter Jr. Now, not world beaters, not the top recruits out there or top transfers out there, but two guys who filled desperate needs you had on that roster. And Manny Bates is going to be an excellent rim protector, and that's something this team just hasn't had recently. Seton Hall. Shaheen Holloway goes and brings in Casey Nadefo and Alamir Dawes from Clemson, who was their best player last year. Providence gets Bryce Hopkins, Noah Locke, and Devin Carter, all high major transfers. And then Creighton, with the biggest potential coup of them all, and Baylor Shireman, who is going to shoot the lights out on a team built to shoot the lights out. Him and Creighton is just a perfect match. So I couldn't just pick one of them. So I wanted to highlight all of them. So the Big East is my winner because...
You told me to come to this podcast with 3 winners, and you brought 10 of them.
More like 7.
Man.
No, yeah, 7.
Okay, you still doubled the amount of winners I was supposed to have. You know what, Josh? I want to talk about Gonzaga.
That was also one of my other winners. Okay. So there you go. Okay.
We're going to talk about Gonzaga. Is that okay?
I want to talk about Gonzaga too.
So, right, of course, transfer portal and NBA draft decisions part of the conversation here, right? So, starts with Drew Timme, right? Very rarely, and when we look back, it's not all that common that a preseason National Player of the Year comes back the next season. And
we're talking Tyler Hansbrough over here.
Right. Hansbrough, Doug McDermott.
Who, by the way, congratulations, Dougie McBuckets, highest paid player on an NBA team. Did you know that? Currently.
Who does he play for?
San Antonio Spurs.
Oh, that's right. I love that. Shouts to the Spurs. Shouts to the Spurs shamelessly taking for Victor Wembanyama. I love it. It is so shameless. I love it. They were like, you know what, Atlanta, you can have our best player. You can have him.
We got Dougie McBuckets.
We've got because every 3.5 weeks, Dougie McBuckets will go 7 of 14 from the 3-point line and have 32 points.
Continue on, Gonzaga. Sorry, just wanted to bring that.
But that's where this starts, right? Sure. It starts with Drew Timme. It starts with, maybe not the preseason National Player of the Year this year, which is also kind of interesting.
Only because last year's came back.
Right,
too.
only because last year's came back, as well as Armando Bacot. And we don't have to have a long conversation about this, but I think it's worth having this quick conversation about this idea of this combination of big guys in college kind of being some of the best players in the sport the last few years, combined with a lot of those guys not having ideal NBA games. And so what you get is you could build, usually it's, I love my first team All-America is all guards. This year, my first team All-America, a lot of big dudes.
Yep.
Drew Timme, Armando Bacot, and Oscar Tshiebwe go on there immediately. 5 players in the country. And then we haven't even talked about Trace Jackson-Davis, Hunter Dickinson. That's all I got.
I think that's about...
But that's 5 dudes that if you're like, yeah, those are the 5 best players in college basketball this year, I'd be like, yeah, okay.
At least 5 of the top 8 or 10.
So it's it is created in a world where the college game is being threatened by other avenues. That all of a sudden, more so than in, I would argue, a while, the best players in the sport, at the tippity top of it, and not the best prospects, the best, players in college basketball from a production standpoint are coming back because, first of all, Oscar Tshiebwe is a millionaire now, playing at Kentucky, so that helps. And also, Oscar Tshiebwe is either the best player on a national championship title contender this year, or he's probably a G League player next year in the NBA. So a very interesting conversation to be had there. But starts with Drew Timme, and then you add your guys, starting with Malachi Smith, who a mid-major guy, which is interesting, right? A mid-major guy that is coming over to a high-major program. We've talked about that plenty. And when you look at it, the most productive of transfers at Gonzaga, a lot of them come from other high major programs. Yeah, well,
technically it's still a mid-major program.
Stop it.
But that's disrespectful to Gonzaga.
Stop it.
Yeah. Right, they do draw a lot of your Andrew Nemhards and...
Right, Andrew Nemhards, Nigel Williams-Goss came from Washington.
Brandon Clark was a mid-major.
Yes.
Rasir
Bolton came from Iowa State.
High-major teams.
But then it starts there.
Yeah, 27-3-2 at UT Chattanooga.
It's a lot.
Now, this is somewhat interesting because what you're going to remember about Malachi Smith from last year was his rough game in the NCAA tournament.
Uh-huh.
However, I was just sort of going back and looking at his box scores game by game to see if this was a trend against higher level opponents. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he put up some big numbers against some of the better mid-major teams they played. Mm-hmm. Murray State's and teams of that nature. Mm-hmm. So, is he going to give you 18 a game? No. Does he have to? Absolutely not.
Nah.
He was one of the most productive players at the mid-major level last year. Was always going to end up at this kind of quality program. Mm-hmm. They were not the only ones going after him. Yeah, absolutely. And then you throw in Efton Reed too, who played 20 minutes a game for LSU as a former 5-star recruit, borderline 5-star depending on who you ask. But
right.
Some people had him as a 5-star, so I'm calling him a 5-star. And he's right. So he's going to come in and replace Chet Holmgren. You lost Nemhart, you got Malachi. You lost 2 pieces. You replaced those pieces and kept everything else intact.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be lethal again. And we've talked a little bit about this already, but it's incredible. It's almost a cheat code for Mark Few because guys don't transfer if they're getting the playing time. Right. If they are important to Gonzaga, they don't leave.
Mm-hmm.
He can also go get 5-star freshmen out of the high school ranks. And it's always a place that the best players looking to transfer want to be to.
Mm-hmm.
So he can build for the long term, develop guys over multiple years, and then sprinkle in.
And then when he has a hole, he can fill it with the best player at that.
Right, sprinkle in this incredible amount of talent, whether it's from the high school traditional recruiting or the transfer portal recruiting. It's incredible.
And the thing, we kind of had this conversation last year and the last couple of years when it comes to one and done 5-star talent, right? And all of a sudden this year is like we're kind of back to the bread and butter of Gonzaga this year, right?
Yep.
It's not, they didn't bring in 3 more 5-star guys that are going to dominate.
The other 5-stars are now going to play bigger roles.
Right, exactly. And that's maybe right. It's not, we had this conversation. Okay, does Mark Few just kind of, does he reload with 3 elite freshmen every year and then sprinkle in transfers? Right. Is that kind of how he starts to build his program? And instead, what you have is it's a team anchored by a 5th-year senior now? Fifth year?
At least.
I
think 5th.
Maybe he's 30 now. Maybe he's 34 years old now.
See, you would have thought it was 5 years ago. I think he's a 5th year. I think you're right. Yeah.
But it's anchored by that guy, and you kind of hope that you've got some 5-stars from last year that step into bigger roles with guys like Andrew Nemhard leaving. You have your the guards last year that weren't quite as elite as maybe they were supposed to be, and maybe that's why part of the reason why Gonzaga didn't feel as untouchable last year as it did the year prior.
Yeah.
But they step into bigger roles. Rasir Bolton is back. You still got your Julian Strathers of the world, and you've all of a sudden got this lethal roster led by one of the best players in the country, and then a bunch of guys who know how to produce on the college level. Yeah. And that's kind of what we've returned to after these couple years of Jalen Suggs, a freshman, and then Chet Holmgren, a freshman, kind of being the second most important player on both of those teams.
Yeah, fitting into a larger picture, but being one of the guys.
Right.
Yeah.
But the conversation last year and the year before was like it was Chet Holmgren. That was the conversation. Yes. And this year it's much more, here's Drew Timme and just a damn good college basketball team around him with a bunch of guys that have played a lot of years collectively in the sport. And we're kind of right back where, and that's kind of the Gonzaga bread and butter, much more than we got 3 more 5-stars this year. We're going to be super talented. We'll see how good we actually are. That's kind of the one and done era, revolving door. And you hope that, you have a guy that kind of, the best years are the ones where where you hit on some freshmen and then you have some leaders that have stayed for a couple years. But Gonzaga kind of on their way back to where they were a couple years before. But the Gonzaga's my first one.
You want to do your second one since now I've done 2 of mine?
Actually, all of my winners were on your list. I'm kidding.
I was gonna say, I highly doubt that.
You highly doubt that? Why do you highly doubt that?
I feel like you would have diversified more than just the Big East.
I have a question. Is Miami allowed to be a winner in the transfer portal?
Sure. I didn't. I sort of strayed away from that. But
do we have a fundamental issue with Miami being a winner of the transfer portal?
No, they landed arguably the top recruit in the transfer portal.
Yes, but do we give them props for that when we really just threw money at him?
That's what this is now.
Yeah, isn't that unfortunate? You don't find that unfortunate?
It's unfortunate. I'm just trying not to dwell on that too much because there's no point. We are where we are.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it's absolutely valid.
I'm going to throw Illinois into the pot here.
That was my third one.
Illinois into the pot here. They lose Andre Curbelo. I think we can have a conversation of whether that's a net positive or a net negative.
That was honestly, but before you continue, when I was debating whether I wanted to make Illinois a winner, before I had decided to turn the Big East into one winner, that was part of my thought process. Is I'm not sure the net gain is enough with what they've lost, but you know what? I think Andre Curbelo is an addition by subtraction. So at that point, I could justify making him a winner. Yeah.
So we can have that conversation.
And it's not a commentary on...
Apparently Curbelo's uber talented, by the way.
He is. It's not a commentary on him. It's just, it wasn't working for whatever reason with Brad Underwood in that program.
Yes,
it was time to move on.
Most programs don't like, just such bad ball control that you can't look away. Most programs don't like that. Anyways, what I was trying to get to, Josh, is that you get rid of Andre Curbelo, perhaps addition by subtraction. We can at least entertain that possibility.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
We can at least entertain that possibility. Then we're adding Matthew Meyer from Baylor, Terrence Shannon Jr. from Texas Tech. That's kind of where that's the 1-2 punch for Brad Underwood in this kind of quick rebuild that I hate using that word. Never mind. I'm not using that word. Retool. Yeah. Just a word that I don't want to use that word. I use that word for NBA teams that are trying.
This is not a rebuild.
Bringing in, a sort of a roster that is quite different from the one that has delivered some success for Illinois the last couple of years. And Matthew Meyer and Terrence Shannon Jr. at the center of that.
You also lose Jacob Grandison, which was part of the equation for me. Not a earth-shattering development, but in terms of the core of last year's team, it's gone. And Trent Frazier, which doesn't factor into the transfer portal equation, and Coburn, of course, too. Right. Those four guys. But you replace them with Meyer and Terrence Shannon, two accomplished players in the Big 12. Matthew Meyer still hasn't taken... And part of this was, too, I was skeptical about how high I am on these two players. Because Matthew Meyer just hasn't taken that next step yet. But this is absolutely a position in which he could do that. And then you add in, and we'll get to this more Big Ten preview, but the exceptionally talented younger players they have that are now going to get to shine, particularly R.J. Melendez. And all of a sudden, this is a top 15 team in the country preseason again. Yeah. So that's all. That is all of the winners I had. Because Illinois was my third one, and Gonzaga was my second.
Gotcha.
If I had to pick one Big East team, I would go with Butler.
The Dogs, baby.
If that makes you feel better.
That does make me feel a little bit better.
No, but I mean, has anybody done better in the actual to go from potentially losing your... Now, of course, most of these guys were going to come back once you got a coach. But no coach... You start late. You get two transfers you are going after to fill voids, and all of these young pieces stay. That doesn't happen.
And as much as I love Aaron Thompson, I think you're going to unlock the backcourt in a way that it just is really hard.
Absolutely.
Right? Because the great thing, the thing that Kamar Baldwin did was that it allowed Aaron Thompson to be Aaron Thompson without being blatantly obvious how poor he is creating offensively.
Right.
For himself, at least. But when you're poor creating for yourself, it's much harder for you to create for others, right? Yep. That's why playmakers that can get their own shot are so highly sought after.
Right.
But Chuck Harris is not Kamar Baldwin. As good as Chuck has been his first couple years at Butler, Chuck is not Kamar Baldwin, so it doesn't exactly mask how static and how difficult offense looks sometimes when AT has to be on the floor because he's that good defensively. Like he's good and he's so good at the things he's good at that he has to be on the floor, but it hinders some offense. To the dismay of lots of Butler fans, because it just looks like, man, it's so much harder for us to get good shots than some other teams. But like you said, you're right. Thad Matta comes in. You get basically everybody you looked at.
They got the targets.
Right. They didn't. I mean, we're talking first choice for pretty much all of the holes they were trying to plug. Simas Lukosius initially in the portal comes back after Thad Matta is named the new head coach. A guy that has become a guy I'm excited about next year. I'm a little Like we've kind of done this like, oh my gosh, did you see this Big East game kind of thing with him? Big East conference. But he was very good at the end of the season. I'm excited that he's coming back. And now all of a sudden you've gone from a team that you weren't sure
potentially
if they had
actually rebuilding.
Right, you weren't sure if they had any sort of direction whatsoever.
Right.
To hiring Thad Matta, to just getting after it in the transfer portal, and really seeing how much pull Thad still has in the sport.
Yep.
Is super impressive. So shouts to the Dogs, and not just because the Dogs, not just because Butler is not just because we're Butler grads.
Yeah. No.
The other thing, the other kind of winner I had was, Indiana, but more based on the fact that there are a bunch of losers in the Big Ten. That some of the teams that needed the transfer portal, and to be fair, a lot of this calculation kind of also starts with, it takes into account guys that either did or did not come back to school, admittedly. Because I think it's just inherently part of the conversation. But IU kind of brought everybody back that was coming back, and Michigan and other teams kind of vying for position at the top of the Big Ten kind of went the other direction. So maybe I'm cheating a little bit here, but really what we're trying to talk about is winners and losers of rosters and the way things shook out with all the moving pieces in the college basketball offseason. Indiana's certainly up there, but kind of in that, the conversation, Butler, Creighton,
just one piece. That's all.
Yeah,
but absolutely,
Houston, lots of there are lots of teams that could go in that third spot.
It really did feel like there were a lot more winners than losers, I will say.
That's what happens when there are a gajillion guys transferring.
Now we go to the losers.
Hit me.
To me, there's one that just sticks out, and I feel kind of bad beating up on them some more, but it's LSU.
Yeah.
Just let's put this in perspective here. 2 of the top 12 transfers listed by 247 Sports played for LSU last year and are now playing for different teams. 3 other players transferred. 2 of the 3 players coming in are from Murray State. This is not Matt McMahon's fault. He knew what he was getting into. This was always what it was going to be.
Right.
But a lot of these teams who lost big pieces were able to at least do some positive things in the transfer portal to help negate that a little bit. And LSU really was not.
I don't have a ton to add, to be honest with you.
Just wanted to throw the numbers to sort of put it into context.
Yeah, it is not especially something... It's not exactly something that anybody a part of that program right this second did wrong.
Right.
But it's the unfortunate reality of the situation for LSU, for Matt McMahon, and just kind of the status of that program at this moment. Yeah, they were on my list as well. Went on there pretty quickly. Next on my list is Iowa State, because it's really tough when a program like Iowa State loses the guy who, like, you were kind of hoping was going to be your guy for at least the next year, if not the next couple of years. And, Otzelberger has seen in his short tenure so far as the Iowa State head coach how nice the transfer portal can be to you and how not nice the transfer portal can be to you, depending on which side of the stick that you're on. I mean, last year we're talking about an Iowa State team that was off to a really, really hot start, right? And a team that made much more noise than we were expecting them to make. And then they kind of fizzled off in the way that we were expecting them to in Big 12 play. But a team that I felt like is moving in the right direction, right? And when you look at, you're talking Isaiah Brockington, Gabe Kelscher from, transfer portals of past. But then, right, you don't get AJ Green this year, despite AJ Green's dad being on the, and AJ Green decided to go pro. So that was clearly like, if he felt like he could get into the NBA somehow, he was going to do it. So maybe it's more, the NBA versus Iowa State, which is not exactly a fair conversation.
The reality was, though, you were in the running for a player with Duke.
Right.
that is always a positive.
Right.
And didn't end up with that player.
Right. And then, I've gone a minute and a half now talking about Iowa State, and I haven't even gotten to the real reason that they're my loser, and that's because you lose Tyrese Hunter.
Yeah.
Not only do you lose him, but then you get to watch him with his new team come into Ames next year and probably beat you.
Yeah. I came real close. They probably would have been my fourth one. I do like a couple of the additions to help negate that a little bit. And I was viewing this more specifically in the context of the transfer portal. So from an overall roster depletion standpoint, they might be team 2 behind LSU. Definitely. I gave them a little bit of grace because some of those, it wasn't all those guys leaving for other programs. It was Tyrese Hunter alone. And I trust Otzelberger when you're able to land some guys in the portal and they're going to work in that program. So I gave him some bonus points for that. But certainly, it is unfortunate he's going to be playing at Hilton Coliseum as an opposing player. I'll stay in the Big 12 for my second team.
Okay.
Oklahoma State. Isaac Likely, Kalen Boone, Rondell Walker played 71 minutes a game among them last season. You got 5 players leaving, and you brought in some successful mid-major guys. But, this is part of the foundation of your roster and was specifically moving forward into this season. I'm still a huge Isaac Likely guy. This season wasn't great, but I will continue to believe he was part of the reason why that team was so good when Cade Cunningham was there. Of course, it was Cade Cunningham first and foremost.
Right.
But the reason that was a really good basketball team and not Ben Simmons at LSU was primarily because of Isaac Likely and the Boones and these guys who are now leaving the program. And, the unfortunate hand they were dealt last year, nobody's fault from Mike Boynton on down within the program. But it's a lot of turnover, and it's key guys that are departing. And I almost made Ohio State one of my winners, partially because of Isaac Likely. I really, we'll get to this more when we talk about the Big Ten. I couldn't bring myself to do it because I don't think they're difference makers, but I really like what Ohio State did in the transfer portal. So that's my second team is Oklahoma State. Just tough go. Just feel bad for Mike Boynton.
That's tough.
It is.
For something he didn't do.
Yeah.
And we've had that conversation a million times, and it as impossible as it is to punish guys that weren't part of the thing that the program did wrong, it's equally as impossible to try to find a way to actually punish those individual guys. Right. Especially when some of those guys are in prison or headed to prison. So it of course makes sense, but it really is unfortunate that you feel like there was palpable momentum.
Yes. And it's just gone.
And now it's, if Mike Boynton makes it through the next 5 years as the Oklahoma State head coach, I won't be surprised, but if you asked me which one I'd bet on right this second, I'm not sure which one I'm betting on. At the very least, the odds are very similar.
It at least changes a conversation about how interested are you in taking other jobs.
Right.
If only to protect yourself and your future for that very reason.
Yep. Man, I could go several different places here. I could go in very similar fashion. I learned this about myself, that if you lost your best player, you're immediately really high on my list, i.e. Kansas State, i.e. Texas Tech, i.e.
Texas Tech's an interesting one because I love what they did in terms of replacements. It's just that Davion Harmon is not Terrence Shannon and Kevin McCullough. They also came that was one of those, again, where my net gain or net loss, I came close. To me, they're one of the obvious teams to have that conversation about, but I didn't feel the net loss was quite big enough to make my list. I was looking specifically for teams that lost a lot and weren't able to replace it very well.
Okay, who's the last on your list?
So my last team is Louisville.
Okay, all right.
Again, not shocking with a new coach coming in and all of that stuff. At the same time, this is Kenny Payne, and you would have hoped that there's always going to be, and that's also part of why I didn't punish Kansas State as much, is I will forever go to bat for Jerome Tang. I just don't know what he's supposed to do there. It's you just kind of got to wipe the slate clean. But Louisville loses, and part of this is also specifically how Louisville's roster broke out last year. There were 9 players averaging between 5.6 and 9.6 points per game. They didn't have a player averaging double figures. Okay? 4 of those 9 players are now gone. Headlined by Noah Locke and former 5-star recruit Samuel Williamson, who, for a variety of reasons, it just never really worked for him. But there's an awful lot of, again, looking to the sort of the core, I almost did the opposite of you. You were looking at the big-time name that you lost. And I was kind of looking at what teams are just going to look completely different.
Yeah, sure.
And don't have sort of an obvious solution to the problem. And so, yeah, I did pick on LSU and Louisville with those coaching situations a little bit. But I'm high on Kenny Payne and what Louisville is going to be. And so this is always, it happens to a certain extent. But again, when you don't have a guy and then you lose 4 out of these 9 players who were the primary scorers on your team, it's...
And I'm also big on, right, Mark Adams is probably going to be fine at Texas Tech.
Yes.
But, like, TJ Otzelberger, like, I'm also big on this idea of, like, the arc of your tenure at your current job can change based on this one transfer, right? Like Otzelberger's doing a good job, but
he's going to get time.
Hopefully. Also we could look up in 5 years and they haven't won more than 4 games in the Big 12.
Right.
So not in the Otzelberger's not going to get fired at the end of the 2023 season. Not necessarily in that sense.
But you might be a top 25 team for the next couple of years if Tyrese Hunter's there.
Right. And you know what trumps literally every recruiting tool? What's the one recruiting tool that trumps literally everything? Winning.
Oh, okay.
Winning. Okay. It's the easiest way to attract somebody to come to your program is to say, look how much we win.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why Gonzaga gets pretty much whatever they want.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Mark Few can say, hey, literally nobody wins like us right now. Literally nobody.
Yeah.
And so it is just a matter of fact that when, and even if it's subconsciously, recruits look at that as, man, that guy didn't really want to go there. Maybe that's the best offer he got. Right? And there's a difference between, getting a chance to play. It happens plenty of times at, regional schools, right? I went to Eastern Michigan instead of Michigan, just hypothetically.
Yeah.
I went to Eastern Michigan, but then I was really good, and Michigan was like, we kind of overlooked that guy. Let's offer him let's see if he's interested in transferring to Michigan.
Right.
But, in the same with Nigel Pack at Kansas State is, Nigel Pack was a first-team All-Big 12 player. And Kansas State really needs those type of guys to stick around to create any type of momentum within their program because those guys just don't come around very often. And you hope that they stick around and that maybe one of those years you have a guy, you have a team around that guy that has a chance to, finish in the top 3 of the Big 12.
Kansas State has had a couple of years in recent memory where they were as good as any team in the conference.
Right. And that it just kills the momentum for certain programs, especially in, because mid-major is kind of the reality of the situation. But there are some, at the high major level, teams that, you feel like they just got momentum that they weren't exactly expecting, at least that, fast from one player, and then he leaves. So it's hard for me to look past those because it just doesn't matter what Iowa State does in the transfer portal after they lose Tyrese Hunter. They're not going to be as good. And the same can be said for Kansas State and those teams that fit on the list of, man, we lost the guy who was our best player last year, would have been our best player next year, and that everything would have revolved around. We have to fundamentally change our offense, the way we think about the weapons on our team because that guy is no longer here.
And the place that hits most is mid-majors.
Correct.
That was not the point you were making at all.
No,
but
no, it
I
was
just
not.
wanted to throw it out there.
Yeah.
In terms of this is what I really dislike about the transfer portal and the way it works.
Sure.
Is, right, you find that guy, you support and develop that guy, and then it's kind of see ya because I want to go test it at the higher level.
But then again, Matt McMahon got to go from Murray State to LSU.
Right, and so as players, it's, yes, we've had this conversation before, and there's plenty of context. The other thing I wanted to bring up in the transfer pool conversation, have you seen how many of these guys have or expect to get a waiver?
No.
Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit. It's not like most of these players are first-time transfers. Mm-hmm. But there is a set of guys.
That's kind of a foregone conclusion.
Davion Harmon being one of them. Mm-hmm. Davion Harmon already transferred. Noah Locke already transferred. Mm-hmm. Right? This is school 3.
Right.
The other one that comes to mind is, I believe, Jalen Bridges. I'm trying to... No, is that who it is? Don't quote me on that.
I'm going to quote you on it. Bubble quote. Pulling it out. Big bold letters.
I'm trying to remember. It's a West Virginia... Part of what I was reading about Texas Tech and Mark Adams' thoughts on this year's team was, yeah, we think we can get... Because we've seen other Big 12 teams, particularly West Virginia, get clearance for transfers, we think we can get it for Davion Harmon too. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm blanking on the player, and I apologize. But that... it's just kind of the snowball effect of, well, if you can do it once, here we are talking about waivers, and it's getting closer and closer to free agency here.
Yeah.
And somehow, some way, the NCAA's got to figure this out and actually let people know how these waivers are going to work in a way that makes sense, because they still don't. And you're always going to have the team that says, well, if that guy gets to play for no apparent specific reason, why does another guy get to play for no apparent specific reason?
Right.
And we're already seeing it here with some of these guys.
Yep. Anything else?
That's all.
That's all. That's it. Okay. Please subscribe to the Jace Today's Podcast, Now Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, and the YouTube channel. I'm looking at you. I know you see it. That red button.
Hit that red button.
That red button right below the screen. I know you see it. I know you see it. And like, you got a Gmail account, don't you? That means you have a YouTube account. Okay, don't give me none of this. I don't got a YouTube account. Don't give me none of that. Hit the subscribe button right down there. Very much appreciate it. And we will be back next week. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jace for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you later.